All right, most important thing for us to talk about today is about the new labor law. And this is coming from the Department of Labor. And this is going to affect just about all of us. Just about all of us. And we need to talk about this. Now, everybody oh, thanks. Yeah, the close will be fine. Thank you. No, close is fine. This is going to affect everybody. Oh, let me mention a couple things since reminded me about the door. The restrooms are right out here. Snacks are right in the back, and you feel free to get up and at any time and get you something to drink and a snack, and then come on back to your seat. But anyway, that card, fill out the card, just leave it on your desk at the end of the day. All right, let's talk about labor laws. Is everybody familiar with the term exempt and non-exempt? You know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about employees, exempt and non-exempt. If you're not familiar with that term, in your book, it used to be on page 23, but it's not anymore. It's a little different. There's a section on exempt and non-exempt that explains it. So, an exempt worker is one that is exempt from the labor laws. Anybody found that page?
I think it's page 8.
Page 8, that sounds right. Yeah, I moved it. Because first of all, when we're going to pay somebody, we've got to figure out, number one, is this person an employee or not? Are they employee or contract worker? Number two, we've got to figure out if they are an employee, then we've got to do these four forms plus E-Verify, and that's on page 8. And then we've got to figure out, are they exempt or non-exempt? So yes, I remember now that I put it in a different order, and that put it on page 8. So page 8, exempt and non-exempt. Exempt means that they're exempt from the labor laws, Fair Labor Standards Act. And that's what exempt means. You're exempt from it. So a minister is exempt. If they work overtime, you don't have to pay them overtime. But if you have a person who is not exempt, that means they're not exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act, they're not exempt from the labor laws, then that person is subject to those labor laws. If they work more than 40 hours in a week, you've got to pay them overtime. You have to. And you don't have a choice. And you don't have a choice about saying, well, next week take off 2 hours. You can't do that. It's got to be done within your 7-day work week period. And so now if it's Wednesday and the work week doesn't end until Friday, yes, you could say, hey, take 2 hours off on Thursday, and then you won't have, by the time Friday rolls around, you will not have it exceeded 40 hours. So, but for a non-exempt employee, you don't have a choice. They don't have a choice. And so this is very, very important, and it's become increasingly important because there's a new law which changes some of this. So, all right. So the Department of Labor has a new amount of money that they have to make. So to be exempt, a person has to have a reason to be exempt, and they've got to make a certain amount of money. So first of all, the reasons they could be exempt: they supervise other people. Come on in. They supervise other people. They have a specialized degree that would make them exempt. Specialized skills that would make them exempt. They are an executive leading the organization. Those kinds of things would normally make a person exempt. And so nowadays you have to be exempt plus make this certain amount of money. And starting July Was it first or second? Okay. Let's see. Starting July 1st, person has to have a reason to be exempt and make $844 a week. $844 a week. Now, starting January 1st, they must make $1,126 a week. That's a lot. That's a lot. Now, here's what's going to happen. Lots and lots and lots of people who are exempt right now, starting July 1st or starting January 1st, they won't be exempt anymore. They'll be subject to overtime. And that's going to happen to a lot of people. Now, it's confusing the way that the Department of Labor wrote this. And I've had this call a lot. The way the Department of Labor wrote it, they wrote it like, for exempt workers, you're going to have to increase the pay. And they made it sound like that. They made it sound like, okay, this person's making, $700 a week. Now they've got to make $844, and you've got to increase the salary. That's the way they made it sound. But that's not true. You can just leave their salary the same, but they just cease to be exempt. They cease to be exempt. And that's been confusing for a lot of people. So let's talk about it regarding church. Now, ministers are always exempt. Ministers are always exempt, no matter what they make. If they make $10,000 a year, they're exempt if they're a minister. Ministers are always exempt. And in fact, as I say in your book, you can write those new figures in. I think the figure that I've got in the book is $684 a week. And you can write the new numbers in. It will be $844, and then starting January 1st, it'll be $1,128 per week. And so this is changing a lot. Anyway, you've got to, if you're going to be exempt, you've got to have a reason to be exempt, and you've got to make that much money, except for ministers. Now, a minister is exempt if they make $10,000 a week, $10,000 a year, whatever they make. They're exempt. Okay? Now, exemption for a minister does not mean ordination. IRS uses ordination as a factor, but the Department of Labor just uses job description. So exemption for a minister does not have anything to do with ordination. Okay? Everybody with me so far? All right. Now, there is what's called, and I'm going to go ahead and do it. This gets complicated, and I usually don't go into this much detail. But there is a thing called the ministerial exemption. Ministerial exemption, and that's what we're talking about. And one of our we've got some noted CPA attorneys in the church space. And so one of them, Richard Hammer, all the time that he talks about ministerial exemption, he talks about clergy. He'll use the term clergy. And of course he'll say you don't have to be ordained, but he'll use the term clergy. Another of our noted CPA attorneys is Frank Somerville, and he talks about the ministerial exemption that has to do with job description. And so it's not quite what we normally think about all clergy. And so you could have, and he gives the example. Here's the example. Let's say we have a daycare and we have teachers, and those teachers teach a curriculum, and they teach the children. And we want to build into their job description a lot of ministerial duties. And so we could build into the job description, you're going to teach Bible stories. You're going to teach Bible songs. You're going to teach these children about Jesus. you're going to lead children such that they will be headed towards a decision for Christ. And, these are your job. That's what you do. And so that would be ministerial job. And with Frank Somerville, he would say that would be ministerial exception, which would qualify them as a minister regarding this law. Now, I would not do that. So you kind of got competing attorneys, and one having a very conservative view that is talking about clergy, the other having a more aggressive view on it that this is talking about job description. And so if you build job description that way regarding your preschool teachers, for example, then you could use the ministerial exception. But I would not do that unless you want to talk to an attorney or a CPA and get their okay, get their blessing to it. Because I think it's a more aggressive stance with the Department of Labor. And I don't like taking aggressive stances with the government, if I can help it. All right? So, everybody with me so far? How are we doing? I see a lot of confusion. So how are we doing? Cool. Give me some questions. All right. Okay. So let's go on.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So who would that benefit or negatively affect that worker?
Well, okay. Here's the thing. For a non-exempt worker, they won't be subject to overtime. So your pastor can take the kids to camp, work 80 hours that week. You don't have to pay them anymore. If your church secretary had to take the kids to camp, then that person is non-exempt. You'd have to pay for all hours worked, which would include a lot of overtime.
Higher tax bracket. I don't think that would be a benefit.
Well, that's what it has to do with really is overtime.
I got you. Okay, thank you.
In fact, I had a church. Okay, so let's take a children's director. And a lot of churches use that term, children's director. And I had a church call me and they said, we're trying to figure out exempt and non-exempt regarding our children's director. And so I said, well, do you have ministerial duties in the job description? And they said, no, we've made it so that we wanted to make sure. They didn't want it to be a ministerial position. And they wanted to call it children's director. And they wanted to use that terminology. And I understand that. That's fine. But in doing so, the way they did it and not putting ministerial duties in the job description, they made that person subject to overtime. So when that person takes the kids to camp, then you got to pay for all that overtime. It's what they're going to have to do. And I tried to say, hey, it doesn't matter what you call it. It doesn't matter if you use the term children's director or not. You could put ministerial duties in the job description. You could make this a minister according to the Department of Labor, and you could make this person not subject to overtime. But that's not the way they wanted to do it. So I said, okay, well, you're free to do it the way you want to do it. But they could have made that person not subject to overtime.
And when they go to camp like that, let's say it's all week, 24/7, is it all of those hours or is it only what
It's
kind of
working hours, and
Which,
so
they're working when they're sleeping too, because they got to make sure nobody's.
yeah. So you could, if you wanted to, you could say, okay, our children's director is a non-exempt employee. We're going to give our children's director some time off during this camp, and these are the hours that you work while you're here at camp. You could do that, but if you're going to do that, you've got to say, okay, you would be free to leave the camp if you wanted to. You know, you don't have to stay here. Now, if you want to stay here, that's fine, but you don't have to. And they
So that
would
put the chaperones.
that put it
the
the chaperones in charge.
responsible.
Yeah. And you could do that. Now, let's take the church secretary. Let's say that the church secretary wants to go to camp and wants to volunteer to go to camp. And you'll say, okay, we'd be glad to have you. You're good, great with children, and we'd be glad to have you. Then that person is volunteering to go to camp, and you don't have to pay them any differently. You don't have to pay them any for that week if you don't want to. But if they volunteer. But if we make them go to camp, that's a whole different subject. So let's say that it's last minute, it's the day that we're leaving, and we say, well, so-and-so just called in and they're not coming. One of our chaperones not coming. And so we say to our church secretary, we need you to go. We're desperate. You know, it's last minute. We've got to have you to go. And the church secretary goes, then we've got to pay that person for all hours worked. And if they work overtime, we got to pay them overtime. If we don't want to pay them for all the hours, then we've got to give them some time off that they would actually be able to leave if they wanted to. Yes, ma'am.
Does that have to be in the same time period? The time off, does it have to be the same time period?
Yes.
As what they pay?
It would have to make their days at camp not over 40 hours that week. So it would have to be time off during camp. Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'm gonna have a question about volunteering.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's.
Go ahead.
time
Go
to
ahead.
do this. Okay, so if you have, all right, I'm just gonna use the real life thing. So we have an associate who is custodial, in the custodial, so he's non-exempt, and he has 34 hours in that role.
Okay.
He also, which his first position was contemporary worship leader, and we estimated 6 hours for that, just prepping,
Okay.
practice, and then Sunday morning. And then when he got the custodial role, we made him the 40-hour employee total with 2 titles. Okay, so now he's wanting to volunteer for one of our teams, sound and media for events and weddings, and be on that team. And there's some concern that could be a conflict. It's nothing he would do in there on that team is in his job description, of course, as custodial. And then in contemporary worship leader, he's just leading the band, preparing the band. It has nothing to do with being in the sound booth working for the event itself. So the question is, can he volunteer in that role for weddings and events, funerals, conferences that we may host there? Could be on the weekend, funerals can be any day of the week. Can he be on that team and serve in that capacity? And then if it is during his work hours, he just, he would be volunteering during the day for that funeral. He just had to do it the other day because our other person wasn't even available, so that was a choice.
Yeah.
And then work another couple of hours, to offset that.
Okay. Now, I'm not 100% sure the answer to this question. Now, the question is a minister of music part-time, custodian part-time, and he wants to do volunteering having to do with really more towards minister of music things than custodial things. And I think you could do that, but I'm not 100% sure. Now, here's what I am sure of. Let's talk about a different example. Let's say that your church secretary wants to volunteer to do those duties, having to do with the sound and running the sound and equipment and stuff like that. Your church secretary, yes, could do that.
Right.
As a volunteer, you wouldn't have to pay that person any difference. Now, let's say the church secretary wants to volunteer to be the church clerk. Okay, that's the same duties. And clerk is a term that just means secretary. You know, it's the secretary for the organization that takes the minutes and takes down notes and keeps up with records and stuff like that. That's the same duties. And so if the secretary wants to be the church clerk, then you've got to pay for all that. You've got to pay for those hours having to do with church clerk. So I don't think I really answered your question, but I think you can do it, but I'm not 100% sure.
Well, because I went and looked back at the job description, because I didn't think there would be an issue,
Uh-huh.
you know. But then I had someone to, you know, challenge me on it, which that's what they're supposed to do. And
Yeah.
so I said, well, I would ask this question today. Because this is a difficult area to get people to volunteer,
Yeah.
because it could be, you know, last minute with funerals or whatever,
Uh-huh.
and weddings. And then generally, you know, when you serve like that for a funeral, the family's gonna give them some, you know, some compensation, some
Yeah.
love offering, you know, whatever. So that's something that you don't know about. So, but it may not. But I just can't see. And anyway, his job description does not say anything about the sound part of making Sunday morning
Yeah.
happen. He's preparing the band, he's doing the music, he's uploading it and ProPresenter, whatever, and then he's up there performing. So now, does he know how to do that in the back? Yes,
Yeah.
but he can't do that and be up there performing.
Right. Tell you what, write that question out for me and put it on the card or put it somewhere, and I'll see what, I've got some attorney resources that I'll see what I can find out.
Okay, because we want to do it right, but if he can do it, we sure need him to do it.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'll do that.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
just to clarify, in the example you give, you said if a church secretary also serves as one that does the minutes, like at the church conference,
Uh-huh.
the budget meeting and all that, she would need to get paid for that.
Get paid for that.
Okay.
If that
Yeah.
puts her over 40 hours.
No, just get paid for it anyway, but then if it puts her over 40 hours, you have to pay time and a half.
Yeah.
So like if her hours are 30 and she works 2 hours being church clerk, then you should pay
Just
for
pay her
32.
2 extra, yeah, 2 extra.
For 32.
I got you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it gonna make a difference if she is or is not a church member? Like if a church
No.
member wants to volunteer, even though she's on paid some other way?
No, it makes no difference whether they're a member or not.
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I am currently church administrator at
Okay.
my church. And so rather than our secretary doing the minutes and all, I do them because I'm exempt.
Okay.
And so I get to, I mean, I just, you know, I do whatever. But now with this, I'm going non-exempt. So now if I were to go over my, I mean, I would include that in my work week.
Yeah, you
Like
need
whenever
to.
we have our business meeting and I'm there doing that even though I'm a member. And I do the minutes and I, you know.
Yeah, once you go to non-exempt status, then you need to be paid for those hours. Of course,
Confusing.
church administrator and clerk, that's a little different. You could say, well, that has nothing to do with my job. And you could say, I'm volunteering to do it, but you didn't really volunteer to do it.
Well, I'm also changing my title.
You're taking, oh, okay.
With
What-
this, I'm now gonna just focus on financial.
Okay.
And the HR perspective and not policies and procedures and all that
Okay.
other stuff. So, cause I just became a grandma.
Just became a,
A grandmother.
oh, wonderful.
I'm
That's
taking-
wonderful.
Yeah. I'm reducing that.
So people who are non-exempt cannot volunteer to do things that are in their job and not get paid. Got to pay them for that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You're the secretary, you are paid. This opportunity to go to camp comes up. Can you separate that to where it's not, since it's not under her normal job description, and pay her a flat fee?
No.
No, okay.
You either need to say you volunteered, it has nothing to do with your job.
Right,
Now you pay that, you could, oftentimes we would pay them their normal amount for that week. We wouldn't dock them pay. I think most of us would do that.
so you can't separate it, it's comes under her salary.
Okay, and that gets us into another term, salary.
Okay.
Salary. Okay, and that's where it gets really confusing.
Yes.
Let me go on to the next slide because I think I've got something about salary. Okay, so a few points here, a few bullet points. Number one, you do not have to increase the pay for a worker. The Department of Labor makes it sound like you got to increase their pay. You don't have to. It's just that if you don't increase their pay according to those figures, then they cease to be exempt. That's all that happens. They cease to be exempt. Number two, the person would simply not be exempt anymore. Number three, the worker would be now subject to overtime pay. You know, they've not been subject to overtime pay, now they are subject to overtime pay. And that would change. Now, let's talk about the word salaried. Churches like to use the word salaried, your own salary. And salary is, in this context, salaried is almost meaningless. Almost meaningless. So what we do is we say, okay, you're the church secretary. We're going to put you on salary. And what it means in our minds and that person's minds is they work a little extra, they don't get paid any extra. They work overtime, they don't get paid overtime because they're on salary. And you can't make it mean that. You cannot make it mean that. It does not mean that. They're still an exempt worker. And now what it can mean, if you want it to mean this, it means that if you take off an hour or two to go to the doctor, or you take off an hour or two to meet your child, or something like that, we're not going to dock your pay. But it can't mean the other side of that coin. It can't mean that you work extra and we're not going to pay you. It cannot mean that. See, so in our context, salaried could mean that first thing. We're just not, you take off a couple hours, we're just not going to dock you. Okay? But it cannot, absolutely cannot mean the other thing. That you're going to work extra and we're not going to pay you.
The only term that determines that is exempt.
Exempt, yeah. Exempt and non-exempt. Okay? Now, we use the term salaried very loosely, and we shouldn't. In fact, for many of us, we ought to just quit using the word salaried. Everybody who is non-exempt should be doing a timesheet. Should be doing a timesheet. And in fact, the Department of Labor says that. They said it's required that everybody who's non-exempt do a timesheet. And then they say, except. There's one exception. And that one exception is if you always work the same hours, week in, week out, your hours never change. If your hours never, ever change, then you can have an agreement with that employee to say, you'd have a memo when you first hire them and say, now your hours are always going to be the same, but if you ever work different hours and you ever work overtime, you must notify us. You must notify us. We must pay you the overtime rate. And so you must let us know. And you would want to put that in writing, put it in a memo. When they're filling out forms, filling out W-4 and A-4 and all that stuff, put that in a memo and they agree to say, I will, if my hours ever change, I will notify you. because this is important. Otherwise, we need to do a timesheet.
So if they do work, you're saying if they work the same hours every week, then they don't have to do a timesheet?
They don't, that's the one exception.
Okay.
And you just notify them. If you ever do work different, then you gotta notify us.
And they would do that by preparing a timesheet, showing the time, what they did for that week. Is that right?
Yeah, the
mean,
best way to
is that
do
the
it,
best
the
way?
best way to do it is do a timesheet. And really the best way to do it, the best way to do it is not to rely on that exception, but the best way to do it is do a timesheet. And if you worked here at State Board of Missions and you're not a minister, you're gonna be doing a timesheet, no matter who you are.
But like what she was saying, like just say our church secretary, Debbie, she is there. She's gonna be there at 7:45 and she's gonna go to lunch and then she's gonna leave at 4:30.
Uh-huh.
That's just it. And so are you saying that then that's her norm, that's what she does, and say she has to do something different one week, that she's gonna come in later or whatever, she would do the timesheet then to document that?
Yeah, she could do a
difference?
timesheet that, if she's gonna have a week that's different,
Uh-huh.
she could do a timesheet that week to document it.
And they also do a time clock, they scan the card and
Yeah,
do that too, but, so that shows when they're there or not.
yeah, most churches don't have a time clock.
They
They would just do a timesheet. And the way that our timesheets work is the employee fills it out, showing each day and how many hours, and then the supervisor signs it, and then that's turned in.
Yeah.
And that's all there. It just takes a minute or two to get it done.
Yeah, that's what they were doing, but my personnel committee asked me to get one for
So-
folks.
You can use a time a time clock, but you don't have to. Yeah. All right, what else do we have about this? Yes, ma'am.
I only work 12 hours a week as a church secretary, and it's the same hours, except when I have a doctor's visit. So I would need to do a timesheet for the week that I have a doctor's appointment.
Not necessarily. And that's where I was talking about most churches want to have a kind of a loose arrangement about that. If you need to go to the doctor, you just go to the doctor, and we're not gonna necessarily dock you for those hours. And then that also comes into play on the week of camp. Okay, so the church secretary volunteered to work, to come volunteer to be our counselor for camp. And for many of us, this concept of salary, even though it's sort of a misnomer, this concept of salary, for many of us as churches, we would just pay them as we always did, and we just would. But it's not necessary. Now, if you're going to strictly have people on hourly, and they don't work that week, you wouldn't pay them for that week. But that's up to you as a church.
Unless they have sick hours or vacation.
Yeah.
All that.
Right. You would want them to use their vacation and sick leave and stuff like that rather than you dock their pay. All right. How are we doing so far? All right. Let's see. So timesheets should be done except for that one exception. All right. Now, this is another thing. How many of y'all have a daycare? Y'all do? Okay. Daycares are usually under the umbrella of the church. And those daycare employees are church employees. And many times we separate the bookkeeping, which that's the way most of our churches do that. But still, separating the bookkeeping, they are our employees. And so daycare employees are ours. Now, let's say that there's a new law having to do with a requirement that you start everybody into a retirement plan. However, that new law exempts churches. Now, churches are the only employers, and employers under 10. So, and churches are the only ones exempt from that new law, that you get everybody into a retirement plan. So, if your daycare is under the umbrella of your church, you don't have to do anything if you don't want to about this new law. If your daycare is separately incorporated, that would mean that it's separate from the church. And, you might think of that as part of the church, but it's separately incorporated. That makes it separate. And you have 10 daycare workers, then I think, I've not seen anything, and this law is new, so there could be further guidance on it. But I've not seen anything to say that you wouldn't have, if you're a daycare separate from the church, I've not seen anything that would indicate that you're exempt from this law. Yes, sir.
What makes them separate? Like how? What's
The
term?
incorporation.
Okay.
The incorporation, yeah. So this would be a separately incorporated entity. Okay, and like at the church that I went to for so many years, they're thinking about having this daycare separately incorporated for a number of different reasons. But they're thinking about doing that, and I know that for them, if they separately incorporated, that would be one of the things that would affect them. And so sometimes they want to separately incorporate for liability reasons. Sometimes they want to separately incorporate to take advantage of perhaps government programs, government food programs, or take advantage of some things that might be available, and things like that. So that'd be some reasons you might want to separately incorporate. But if your daycare is separately incorporated, you might be subject to this. And what it says is you've got to put everybody into a retirement program. You take out 3% of their pay and put it into that retirement program, and it's automatic. It's called automatic enrollment, and you automatically do it, and you always automatically do it unless they want to opt out. And you'd have a little form that you'd say they want to opt out, they don't want to do it, and you say, okay, sign this form, and okay, you've opted out. We're not going to do that. But that's part of the new Secure Act 2.0. And I wanted to mention that for anybody who might have a daycare or something that's separately incorporated. Was there a question back here? Okay. All right. Anything, I was trying to remember if there's any other laws that, and then just an explanation of the ministerial exception. And I think I've kind of covered that. It has to do with the Department of Labor, so it has to do with job description, not whether you're ordained or not. And if that person is ministerial exempt, then they're exempt from all the labor laws. Actually, even minimum wage. They're not subject to minimum wage. You have your pastor work 40 hours and, pay them $100 a week, and that's okay for a minister. And so now, let's see, one more thing. Oh, I know one more thing I was going to say about that. Sometimes we as churches, we want to have an internship, and you can do that. And we want to say, okay, you're going to work all summer long. We're going to pay you $500 at the end of the summer, and we want you to work 40 hours a week. Can we do that? No, absolutely not. You must pay an intern a minimum of minimum wage. You must. And you must pay for all hours worked. And if they ever work overtime, if you say, okay, intern, you're going to camp with us and you're going to work 80 hours this week, well, you got to pay them overtime pay for all that. An internship is always subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act. They're always non-exempt workers. Yes, sir.
How does the health care industry get around that?
How does the healthcare industry
Get around that?
get around that? I have no idea.
My daughter, well, she's a doctor now, but when she went through college, she had to intern at least 3 semesters, maybe 4.
Yeah.
And she was not paid a dime, and she worked full-time at Thomas Hospital.
Now you can do that if they're totally volunteer. It's no problem.
I mean, if this was required by the,
Yeah.
to get a degree.
By her class, in her school.
Well, that university is not their employer, and so that's probably why they can require it but not pay them. And so according to everybody, that person volunteered to do that internship, and they volunteered in order that they could get the degree.
Our engineering company, we had people, say they want to be an intern, and we said, well, we really can't afford an intern this summer or something. They want to volunteer, but our lawyers have told us we cannot do that.
Well, there's been, especially in secular business, there's been a lot of abuse of internships, and so the labor department's been cracking down on that, and that's probably why your lawyer said that. That there might be some kind of indication that this person was coerced into volunteering.
I'm sorry, that didn't have anything to do with church treasure.
Oh, well, I haven't heard of any churches getting into trouble about internships in that they were, coercing them into it. But a church could get into trouble so you make them volunteer. You're totally volunteer. We're not gonna pay you a dime. That's fine. You can work them 80 hours a week. Okay, we're going to pay you. Now that we're going to pay you, we've got to follow the laws. And we don't have a choice in that. We must follow the Fair Labor Standards Act. We must pay you at minimum of minimum wage. We must pay you for all hours worked. And we must pay you overtime if you ever work more than 40. So you've got your choice. We'll go this way or this way.
So we did a thing, we had one summer, we actually sent to the college, a donation toward her, fees that she was gonna have the next year. Would that have been considered pay? We didn't. It was sort of like a scholarship.
Well,
We didn't set it up as a scholarship.
we as churches usually don't do scholarships, right?
Right.
A true scholarship done by a church should be where you've got a reasonable number of applicants. You've got an application form available to lots of people. You have them fill out the form, and then whether they get the scholarship or not is based on how they meet the criteria. And usually we want to, we're going to give one scholarship, and it's got to be a church member. It's got to be part of our senior graduating class, and so you got 3 people who are potential candidates for it, and that's not really a scholarship program. Now, I think it would be pressing it a little bit to say this was totally volunteer and we decided to award a scholarship. I think that's pushing it a little bit.
Well, we called it a donation to her.
Yeah,
But I don't know. It was a small amount, so we probably get it wrong, but.
well, and you could say, I think you could say, this person never was an employee, and we made a donation. You could say that.
Well, that's what we did.
In the way that the Department of Labor is kind of picky about internships and things, I think that's pushing it a little bit, but I think you could do it. So I don't think you said we may have done it wrong. I don't think so. I don't think so. All right. Yes, sir.
What about, like, you know, pastor appreciation, staff appreciation's coming up here shortly for us anyway.
Uh-huh.
And normally, everyone will probably, that gives something, will probably have a card with some money in it, most likely. Is that probably not acceptable?
If it comes from your church, you gotta put it on the W-2. Now, if an individual gives to the individual staff member direct, then, and you did go through the church or anything, then you don't know about it, so you can't put it on the W-2. And then that minister has got to figure out, okay, did I get this money because they're my friend and they just wanted to? Or were they kind of coerced into it because the church was saying, hey, give a gift to your pastor, you know? And if they feel like, if that minister feels like that I'm getting this because of the church saying something about doing this, then I probably should consider it taxable.
So
But-
as long as we.
But they'd have to do that.
As long as it's just a card given directly to the staff member, the
Yeah.
church has no responsibility at that point. It's the
Right.
individual staff member.
Or you can give it to the chairman of the deacons and he does it and it didn't go through the church, right?
Well,
Isn't that where?
that's pretty church tie into it. If I was that pastor, I would think I need to add this into my taxable wages. Now the church didn't count it or collect it or anything like that, so the church wouldn't add it to the W-2 because we don't know how much it was. But if I was that pastor, I would say this is taxable.
That's the
gonna
way
add
of getting around going through putting it on the W-2.
Well,
But
Yeah.
it puts it in the pastor's.
Yeah.
it puts it as
responsibility
they're responsible.
Instead of the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Okay, one more thing I want to mention. Your insurance, your church insurance, and these are just some topics that are sort of miscellaneous topics, but your church insurance likely went up in the last couple of years. Anybody whose insurance did not go up last couple of years? It started with COVID and then shortages of material and then supply chain problems and then labor shortages, which have caused labor to go up, and then we've had a tremendous number of storms these last few years. And so insurance companies they're basically kind of losing money right now. And so one of the things they've done is raise rates. Now, how do insurance companies make money? You ever thought about that?
By nobody making claims.
Okay, three ways really. Number one, nobody making claims. Number two, they make money by the premiums we pay. And number three, insurance companies make investments. Insurance companies hope that they're not paying out a lot in claims, and they hope they've got this money sitting around to invest it, and they hope they can make a lot of money in investments. Well, so they're paying out a lot of claims right now. We don't have the situation of we've not had any hurricanes this year. It's a quiet year, not very many storms, things like that. So they're not paying out claims, so they're making money. That's just not happening right now. They're paying out a lot. And so insurance companies have been not making much money or none, and they've got to make some money somewhere. And so the only way to do it this year and the last couple of years, the only way to do it has been to increase premium. And that's why you're getting premium notices that are going up. What's been the range? I've heard 20 to 40%. Anybody kind of different from that? Okay. So don't be surprised. All right, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and talk about some other subjects. I have lots and lots of questions that come up about fundraiser issues. And the way that I build this conference is based on law changes, things that I hear from the conferences I go to, and then the other thing is the questions that I receive, phone and email and stuff like that. And I get lots and lots of questions about fundraiser stuff. So let's go to page 58. And Frank Somerville is one of our attorney and CPA guys that is nationally known in church circles. Does a lot of teaching on this. Great guy, and very, very involved in his church. And he helps us to understand a lot of this stuff. And so that's where this is based, this page. And so there's lots of potential problems with fundraisers. Now, I'm not saying don't do fundraisers. Of course not. I'm not saying that. But be careful. That's the key. Be careful. And so there's some potential here. Exempt organizations must be organized and function exclusively for their tax-exempt purpose. Exempt organizations must be organized and function exclusively for their tax-exempt purpose. And here are some of the issues about fundraising. Number one, selling is an issue. Now, you could do it, but there's several things that could come up as a result of selling stuff. I was talking to a church the other day. They're selling church cookbooks. A lot of times, I haven't heard of this as much as I used to, but we used to sell donuts all the time. And Krispy Kreme had a thing where you could get a box of donuts. Gosh, a long time ago, you could get for a fundraiser. You could get a box of donuts for $1, and that is a long time ago. Yeah, I think they were probably regular price a couple of dollars, and you could get it for $1 if you were doing fundraising. Selling stuff brings about certain issues, and yes, you can sell stuff, but you need to be aware of these issues. And so, as we think about selling things, if you divide the money according to how many hours they worked, or according to how many donuts they sell, then you've just made them an employee. You just made those youth an employee. And then they're subject to minimum wage and subject to taking out taxes, now, of course, they're not going to make enough to take out federal and state, but no matter what they make, it's enough to take out Social Security tax. So that youth that goes out selling donuts and you're going to pay, in effect, you're going to pay them for selling donuts. And so in doing so, they're subject to taking out Social Security and matching it. And you've got to do that.
So here's a couple of things what we do, and so not to have the fundraisers, like it's just built into the budget. They'll have, the church will pay a portion of camp for each child, and then we also have several of our longtime members that have had children come up through and everything, and they will always just call and say, hey, I'd like to give a scholarship for the youth camp this year. And so then I just take that, I put it in that account, and then I notify the youth minister or children's minister that we've had some scholarship money come in that can be applied to a youth or person that may want to go to camp but can't afford it. Something like that.
That's perfect.
Okay.
That's perfect. So there's two ways that you can deal with this. One way is we just don't have fundraisers. That's one way to deal with it. Another way to deal with it is you divide the money equally among everybody going, whether they worked or not. And I know that's going to make some people mad. It just is. And they're going to say, well, we do all these fundraisers and so never works. They always get the money, but they never work, and so some of your parents are gonna be mad about that, but that's just one way to deal with it, is you divide the money equally, whether they worked or not. That's one way. All right? So actually, you know, we're talking fundraiser, you could get into minimum wage and labor law and taking out Social Security and all that stuff, but you don't want to do that. And so the easier answer is divide the money equally among everybody going. Or the other answer is you could divide the money among those who need it. Everybody's going to work the fundraiser, but we're only going to give the money to those who need it. Okay?
Is it legal to do it, our youth minister, if you sell, your deposit is this figure. If you don't sell, your deposit is a little more. Is that, and then everything, the rest of everything that comes in, I mean, all the money that comes in just pays camp?
I think that's okay as long as the amount of selling has nothing to do with their deposit. You know, let's say that they,
No, not the amount, but just.
Yeah, the
amount they
amount.
sold.
okay, so let's say that they're gonna get $50 off their deposit if they come help, and they only sold $10 worth of stuff, then I think that's, but you say, okay, you're gonna get your deposit anyway, then I think that's okay. But if we tie it to the amount of work or the number of hours or something like that, then that's not okay. That's a good question.
So what about fundraisers for other activities, other ministries besides, say, youth and children's camps and things? So we have the Shepherd's Table, which is
Okay.
a community ministry of providing food, canned goods, frozen goods, and all, and we partner with Food Bank.
Okay,
And so recently, there was an opportunity for them to fundraise, and Food Bank would match that.
okay, so they're doing fundraising, but this has nothing to do with any money
Coming to the
or
church.
value that I'm going to receive. This is all totally for other people.
Yes,
Okay,
so we're
then
that
that's
ministry.
perfectly fine,
Okay.
perfectly fine.
What about fundraisers for mission trips? Not like church camp things, but like if you're a member of our church and you're going on a mission trip and you ask us to help you raise money, how does that handle?
It works the same way as camp, in the sense that if you base the amount of money they're going to get based on the number of hours they worked or the number of units they sell, then that's a problem. Now, if you just had fundraisers for the mission trip and everybody's going to get the same amount, no matter if you worked or not, then you can do that. You can sell stuff, and you know, and you're not in any problem.
But what about mission? Like if it's just you, and you're going on with another church or something,
Just an outright donation for
and
that
then
mission trip.
you want to have fundraisers at our church for your mission, even though you're a
Yeah.
church member, you want to have the fundraising activities to fund your trip to East Egypt somewhere.
Well,
How is
it
that
depends on
money handled?
it depends on how you do the fundraising.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing fundraising just for asking for donations, you know, please give me a donation, then that's fine. One that we had a long time ago, gosh, this is 50 years ago, and so I've not heard of it since. But we had this thing called, it was weird, it was a rockathon. And they were going to stay up all night rocking in a rocking chair. And I mean, you know, they were going to be up 24 hours, and they got pledges.
Yeah.
You know, it gives certain amount to, you know, to as a pledge. Now that's okay, because they're not selling something. They're not working. They just got pledges, and you know, and they're gonna do this weird rocking thing, you know. They did, it's not having to do with anything about units sold or time, the time that I worked or anything like that. So I think that one's okay.
Why do you think some churches don't do fundraisers? Just because of all the different things that can come up with it, or?
Depends on your youth and, number one fundraiser is always children and youth. I mean, you know, I don't know a lot of other fundraisers that we do. And it depends on your children's and youth budget, really.
Gotcha.
I knew a church that they paid for their youth camp entirely out of the youth budget.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, you know.
Yes.
And you know, you're thinking about youth camp these days. What is it, 300 and something a
Yes.
kid?
At least, yeah.
Passion was over 6.
Over 6, wow, wow. So there's a handful of churches that are paying for it entirely out of their budget, but that's not true of most of our churches. And so, you know, in order to, if this is going to be $300, and we don't think people can afford it, we're going to try to do some kind of fundraiser.
I know a lot of the recovery ministries do, they do fundraisers. They'll sell food and shirts and stuff to help with those ministries.
Yeah. And so as long as I could be working, selling stuff, but if it's for other people, this money's going to go to other people. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
But if this money's coming to me to benefit my camp or my mission trip, you know, it's going to cost me $300, and the fundraising that I do takes off $175. So, well, then if it works that way, then that's a problem.
You can get into the labor.
Yeah, you get into the labor issue.
Makes sense.
Okay?
Don't you also have to be careful about, the number of fundraisers you have in a year because of sales tax?
Yeah. In fact, that's a good transition. We need to talk about sales tax. So I wrote this page 58. Page 58 is written to be from the standpoint of the easy answer. Remember that, who was that, Office Depot or somebody had the easy button? Well, this page is the easy button. And that's the way that I wrote it. There are some things that you can do that are not the easy button, and you still can do them if you want to. So, sales tax is next. If we're going to be selling stuff, and if we sell, this is what the Department of Revenue of Alabama says. If your church is going to sell stuff a couple of times a year, we consider that a casual sale. And therefore, you don't have to collect sales tax. But if you're going to sell more often than that, then you need to collect sales tax. And I've known of churches that have done selling stuff once a month. I've known of them to do selling stuff pretty often. And you have to look at your total church. Like, you know, if the youth are selling something and the children are selling something and the senior adults are selling something, you look at all those activities. You don't just look at those things individually. And so if you're selling stuff more than a couple of times a year, and this could be your yard sale, you're selling donuts, you're selling spaghetti suppers or Boston butts or whatever, if you're selling more than a couple of times a year, you're supposed to collect sales tax.
Wow.
And that's Alabama law. That's Alabama sales tax.
But that's if you're trying to get a profit, you're trying to make something, right? But you can sell like t-shirts. Say we can take orders for t-shirts. We want to do, you know, a new t-shirt for the church, and you can order yours, whatever. And we're not trying to make money on it. They're just selling it at cost or whatever.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about sales tax regarding things within the church.
Okay.
Within the church, like a lot of times we'll order a case of books that, you know, this class is going to study this book, and we're going to order a case and then sell them to the people that attend that class, and it's a convenience matter.
Right. Okay.
And so therefore we don't have to collect sales tax as long as that's within our church, within our church and our church activities like Bible school. You know, I know we've got other kids other than our own at Bible school, and we can sell all of a T-shirt. We don't need to worry about sales tax
Okay.
on that.
I've never thought about that.
On that. Yes, ma'am.
Once a quarter, our ladies have a bake sale to raise money for our food pantry program. With them doing that 4 times a year, they have to collect the sales tax?
From the way they say it, probably so. And you'll want to contact the Department of Revenue. And just say, this is what we do, and we do it 4 times a year. Do we need to collect sales tax? Now, a lot of you are thinking, okay, sales tax has already been paid. We bought the donuts and we paid sales tax.
Right.
But that's not the way the Department of Revenue thinks about it. They think, hey, you bought those donuts for $1. Well, I know you can't these days. That'd be like 1 donut would be $1.
Dollar and a half.
You know, I know you bought those donuts for $1, but you're selling them for $2. We want sales tax on the full $2. You know, that's so. Just say that we've already paid sales tax. That's not going to work.
Couldn't they look at that, know that that's not like benefiting someone in particular, that's for the ministry of their church. I don't know, it's just hard for me to think they'd have to pay sales tax on that.
Yeah, if we're going to be selling, and we're selling to the public
Yeah.
more than a couple of times a year, then we've got to think about, we might need to collect sales tax. So,
The key is selling to the public,
Yes.
not to your church members.
not
No,
within the
okay,
church,
okay.
not within the church family.
Okay, I
Yeah.
gotcha.
Because we sell to the public.
Yeah, because
I
you're
gotcha.
selling to the public.
Mhm.
There is a church, there's a church that I've been talking to, Senior Adult Group. They are selling cookbooks. Senior Adult Group has their own checking account. Has their own checking account, which is not uncommon. But this checking account is owned by the church, but not controlled by the church. Senior adults totally control that checkbook. The church never sees a report of what that money is doing.
Goodness.
This group is selling cookbooks, and then they're using the money for anything they want to do with that money. Even the senior adult group going to lunch. We're going to pay for everybody's lunch. And the church is perplexed. This is bad. This is bad. So, number one, they're selling stuff. Number two, that's subject to Alabama sales tax because they're doing it all the time. Number three, they're not using the money for church purpose, which, remember that first statement that we did? All the money, assets, everything of your church must be used exclusively for tax exempt purpose. They're not doing that. And it's not controlled by the church, which is, in terms of internal controls and things like that, that's terrible. So that church is in a real bad mess. Yes, sir.
Our men's ministry has its own checkbook. I've never thought about this. The way we have breakfast once a month, and there's no set amount. Everybody pushes some money in the middle of the table at the end of the day, and it's always profitable. But that money has never been used for anything other than ministry for the church. We usually give it now to like Samaritan's Purse or Compassion or something. Do I have an issue? Do I have a problem there?
You don't. There should be a
We don't
reporting.
even ask for anybody to pay for their breakfast.
Yeah.
So it's a donation total.
There should be a reporting to, for your accounting purposes.
It is.
Yeah, then that's fine.
And like Sunday school classes, they'll have their little, where they take up money and then they do.
Yeah.
We do have one,
We do.
and then that's what they do for members that are sick, have had surgery,
Yeah.
they may get them a meal or, that kind of thing. Is that? but
Is
they
that
keep up with
checking
that.
account, is the checking account owned by the
No,
church?
no, 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 no. I don't
Okay.
even know if they have, they just collect that money and they have like a treasurer for that
Yeah,
class and
that's fine.
they, keep up.
I mean, it can be abused.
Sure.
You know, we can have all
Well,
these little
church
groups having their
treasurer,
own their own checking account and things like that. That can be abused, but the way you're doing it, it's okay. It's okay. All right, so sales tax is an issue. And again, down the bottom of this page, I said something about just have a few fundraisers a year, and that's, I'm thinking about the easy button here. That it's a way to avoid having to do sales tax. Now, talking about the opposite of that, not the easy button, there's a church near Tuscaloosa in Tuscaloosa, near the campus. They have a coffee shop, and it's open to the public, and they're selling coffee, they're selling pastries, they're selling stuff like that. It's open to the public, and so they've got to think about all these things. They've got to think about collecting sales tax. They've got to think about when we pay people, that's going to be taxable income. They've got to think about all the different issues we're going to talk about today. And they just deal with it, and that's okay. There is one more called unrelated business income. And we'll talk about that one. I don't remember if that was next or not, but anyway, let's see. Okay, I think we've covered that. All right. Now, Frank Somerville, I just thought about the tax implication of, in essence, you're paying people to sell stuff. And I just thought about the tax implication, but Frank Somerville said the IRS really is more concerned about private benefit. Now, private benefit is where somebody takes advantage of the church to receive a benefit or make money. That's what that is, private benefit. And so, and private benefit happens in a lot of ways. Somebody wants to rent out a room of our church, but they want to make a quote donation, and they want to give you $5 to rent that room as a donation. Well, that's private benefit when they're doing that room for their own purpose. We're going to sell Tupperware or whatever, jewelry, or we're going to have a party in order to sell stuff. Then that is private benefit. The only way to make that not private benefit is they've got to pay a reasonable amount of rent, and then it would not be private benefit. Whatever that space could rent for, that's what they need to pay. And so, concept of private benefit is like somebody took advantage of the church to make money or receive something or do something. And the IRS, this thing about selling stuff to make money for my camp, the IRS actually considers that private benefit. That's why they want us to pay taxes on it, payroll taxes on the selling. So be careful about selling and how you do it. And the best answer is divide the money according to all people who are going to the camp, no matter if they worked or not. That's the best answer. Okay?
Talking about that, if you had a person that wanted to, if you wanted to let somebody use your music room to teach piano, and they charged the people for piano lessons, but you let them use the facility, no charge, is there any liability back to the church for that as far as?
Well, liability in the sense that you got people in the building, that's one thing. That's having to do with your insurance.
Well, I mean,
But liability concerning what we're talking about is, yes, that is private benefit. I know they don't think of it that way. I know your church doesn't think of it that way, but they're taking advantage of the church to make money. So your answers on that, you've either got to say no, you got to charge them appropriate rent, or now in this case, they're doing music lessons, which is something we would like to have at our church. And so you take that on as your church's ministry. That's going to become ours. And we will pay you appropriately to teach music. And that's what we'll do.
Ministry.
So otherwise, it's private benefit, which was not something we're supposed to be doing. Oh, I said the words best answer, and that reminded me of something that I said in the break. Now, going back to our previous topic. The best answer concerning this thing about non-exempt workers, the best answer is to have a timesheet. I said it in the break, but I wanted to say it there. I don't know if everybody was in the room at that point. Best answer is to have a timesheet. This thing about having people, they're going to notify us if their hours ever deviate. Well, that's not as good of an answer. The best answer is to have a timesheet. And that protects the church. Because if somebody said, hey, I've worked all these hours, I didn't get paid for these hours, and I've worked, and you didn't pay them for that, oh, thanks, Laurie. You didn't pay them for that, then they could say to the Department of Labor, I worked all these hours, I didn't get paid, and you're just going to have to pay up for that. So the best answer is a timesheet. All right. Now, getting back to this.
If they filled out the timesheet, then come back at you 6 months later and said, I've been working extra, but they filled out a timesheet, are you still liable?
They would fill out the timesheet. They should sign it. The supervisor should sign it. And if they said, hey, I worked all these extra hours, but that's not what you said on your timesheet, then the church would not be liable for that. Yeah.
So I told you personnel asked to implement a time clock so that when they're coming in, they're, So can you print that out and we sign that rather than a manual timesheet as well?
You could. Yeah,
Okay.
you could do a time clock thing.
Okay.
Now, I said that unless that person is coerced. A supervisor said to them, hey, we've got another project that needs to be done today. Can you go clock out and then we want you to come back and finish this? Now that would be coerced, and you could be in lots and lots of trouble over that. But as long as they filled out the timesheet, they were not coerced in any way, and they put the hours, and then they wanted to come back and say, hey, I worked more hours and I didn't get paid for it, or you just say, well, that's not what your timesheet says. And you as the church would not be liable for that. See the difference? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So, selling in which the money's applied to their trip according to how much they sold or how many hours they worked, that's a problem. Not collecting sales tax might be an issue if you if you do selling stuff more than a couple of times a year, and if you're wondering about, hey, we do 3 things or we do 4 things or 5 things, then just contact the Department of Revenue, and they will tell you. And when I've asked that question of them, I've gotten consistent answers. That they say if it's just a couple of times a year, we consider that casual sale, and we're okay. All right, private benefit is an issue. We talked about that one. Now, camp versus mission trip. A camp, camps are about benefiting us and our kids and our youth. That's about us. Camps are about us. And so therefore, things, if, you know, when I pay for my kid to go to camp, that's not a donation. That's not a donation. I'm paying for something that benefits me. However, a mission trip is not about us. Even if I'm going on the mission trip, that's not about me. That's not to benefit me. It does benefit me, but that's not the purpose of the mission trip, to benefit me. And so mission trips are not about us. And so therefore, a mission trip is a tax deductible event. You make a contribution to the mission trip, that is tax deductible. I pay for my own way to go on the mission trip, that is tax deductible money.
Wow, I didn't know that. I just
Yeah.
did. I just collected several.
Yeah.
And all the deposits, I did not put under contributions.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, I didn't know.
Now, not for a camp, but for a mission trip.
Yeah, mission trip.
Because mission trips are not about something that benefits us.
Okay, what if they're selling something like a little notebook or paint this, that, and the other? If you had the ladies come paint something for a night and hear about, then their fee that they paid to get this painted, whatever, picture of a church or something, but the money was used, that they raised, was used to go on a mission trip. And
Okay.
they got something of value when they painted it that night.
Well, that's not, none of that's a donation. Because they just sold something.
Okay, so what happens next?
Nothing. Now, it's not a donation, so it's not on anybody's contribution statement.
Okay, but what about the person who did that at your church?
Oh, the painting?
Well,
Oh.
I mean, the person who's in charge of it, like, I'm raising money for me to go on a mission trip. So I
Okay.
have her come in and lead a painting group. And
Oh.
then everybody takes this painting that they paid $50 for to go home, but the extra money, thing didn't cost but $10. And the extra money was going to my benefit
To
for
your
my mission trip.
Okay, let's analyze that. Okay, did anybody donate something? Okay, the person who came and conducted the painting class, they might have donated something, or they might not. Let's say they donated their time. Time is not tax deductible. So they didn't donate anything that's going to be on their giving record. Let's say they donated all the supplies for that night. That would be something that could be on the contribution statement. See what I mean? Now that's the person who conducts the class. Okay,
What
those
about
people who
sales
come,
tax even?
those people who come for the class and pay for the class, they didn't make a donation because they got something in return.
Value. Okay, what about sales tax?
As long as that's now, maybe that's open to the public, and you're selling the stuff, and that could be subject to sales tax. You said, hey, the materials for this class cost $10, and so that could be subject to sales tax if you do it more than a couple of times a year.
Wouldn't that be on the creator's side though? Would be her responsibility, the painter that come in and is, facilitating the class. She's the one that's.
Well, how did you do the money? I mean, did that person take up all the money, or did the money go to the church?
Did she take all of it and then she says, okay, it cost me 10, I'm giving you 40.
Okay, she took it, I know some of it has been done on Venmo, but it also states in our bylaws that all the money, any money raised to the church, for the church, has to go through the church bank account. So that's another conflict. We've never had an issue with with like raising money for missions and stuff. We've never
Okay.
done that.
But nobody getting a painting is going to get a donation out of that.
Right.
Now, is that your question?
No, I'm just saying, how do you handle the money? I mean, like, are we required to pay sales tax on some of that?
I would
Is it-
think you would be. I think.
Well, that would be another issue, is where did the money go? Did it go through the church? Were you selling the supplies? then that might be subject to sales tax. If all the money went to the teacher and
went to the
didn't go
person
to
who
the
was-
church, then that'd be their responsibility.
Went to the mission trip person.
Went to the mission trip person.
Mission trip person in that instance really wouldn't have any responsibility because they were just receiving a donation. They didn't do the class or something like that.
So
Okay.
really, the easiest way there would have been have the event, collect the money, proceeds go directly to mission trip person.
It could, that'd be easy, that'd be
That's the
easy.
easy thing.
Now, you've got it in your bylaws though, that that's not the way it's supposed to be
I
done,
think I
so,
got that wrong.
so you should follow your bylaws in how it should be done.
So it had to go through your church.
Yeah.
And what happens if that mission trip doesn't have, just for instance, if you decide that you're going on a mission trip, we raise money for you to go, and then you get sick or something and can't go, or your wife tells you, no, you've been gone enough lately, you gotta stay home this time, and you don't go, what happens to that money then?
The money should stay with the church. Yeah. And you need to tell people that. If you give to the mission trip, if you intend to go on the mission trip and you end up not going, we're not gonna give you your money back. You know, it's gonna stay with the church for future mission trips and future people who go. Yeah.
So does a person who contributes to a camp scholarship get a contribution?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just making sure. They didn't go.
A parent paying for their kid to go to camp, no donation. A parent, they've already paid for their kid, and now they want to give $100 extra, that would be a tax deductible contribution. Or somebody else wanted to give a scholarship to somebody going. But now the person other than parent,
Okay.
and they want to give a scholarship, they cannot say who it's for. It's got to be unconditionally given.
And I think to answer your question, you bought the supplies and there was sales tax paid on the supplies, and then the person teaching the class is providing a service, and that's not taxable. So just to
Yeah.
answer that question, I teach quilting, so they buy the supplies, I teach the class, and the Department of Revenue involved.
Okay, so a mission trip, back to a mission trip. A mission trip is a tax deductible event. If I pay for my kid to go to the mission trip, that's tax deductible. If I pay for myself to go on the mission trip, that's tax deductible. If I pay for somebody else to go, that's tax deductible as long as I don't name, like it's not my kid. And as long as I'm not naming who I want this money to go for, then that's tax deductible. But-
Even your deposits.
Deposits would count too.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about your grandchild? Does it have to be your child?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. That's.
Sure that you can.
I would think you could, but I'm not certain. Put that on your sheet, and I'll get back to you. Okay. So a mission trip is a tax deductible event, but the way we do, but fundraising is, let's go back to fundraising, but fundraising is a different issue. So if we're doing fundraising for the mission trip and we're selling stuff and we're saying, hey, you go out and sell all these donuts, that's the same thing as selling donuts for the camp. It's the same thing. You've still got those fundraiser issues, but that it's separate. It's the way we raise the money and what the money goes for, those are two different questions. And so the selling stuff to go towards the mission trip, you've got the same considerations. All right? Now, okay, camps, mission trips. So if we were to raise money for the mission trip, is that okay? And we may get into some of the same issues. So if I'm required to pay or go tax qualifying mission trip, that money is tax deductible as a volunteer expense. And so I can do that. You've actually got the IRS code section there. All right. If I were to earn the funds, then that's not a contribution. It's not a contribution. And if I'm working and I'm getting, in effect, paid for the number of hours I worked or the number of units I sell, that gets you into those labor issues, even if it's a mission trip. Okay? All right. How are we doing so far? Everybody with us? Okay. And so the concepts merge together when I work to pay my volunteer expenses, and the expenses are still deductible, but the way that I earn the money might, if I earn the money to go and I pay that money, and I let the church keep that money to pay for my trip, that's not a contribution. I didn't make a contribution. The church helped me to earn the money, and the church gets the money towards that trip. Okay?
So that's not I'm confused.
It's not because I worked for it.
But if you didn't work for it, I just say I'm going on a trip next week, and then my deposit is $500. I give my $500.
Yeah,
That's
is a contribution.
supposed to be a contribution.
That is.
Okay.
All right?
Technically, you probably did work for it.
Right.
You got the money, but-
Yeah, you did work
Not
for
a
it, but you didn't work
specific-
for the church.
Right,
But
right.
if I cut the grass to get at church to be able to go to church, that is not a contribution.
That's not a contribution.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Because that's a service.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Let's go on. All right. Number 2, sales tax. I think we've already talked about that one thoroughly. Sales tax issues, if we're selling stuff. And then the other issue is if I'm selling things and I'm getting, in effect, paid for how many units I sell or how much time I work, then that's subject to being an employee and withholding and all that stuff. And so don't do it that way. Divide the money. The best answer is divide the money equally among everybody, whether they worked or not. And I know that's going to make people mad. All right, so income tax withholding. All right. Other employment issues. I mean, you could get into minimum wage and child labor laws and stuff like that. So you'd rather not go there.
Has there ever been any cases where that has come into
Yes.
issue? Really?
Yes.
Wow.
It was a booster organization. I think it was Little League Baseball, I think. And there was a booster organization that got the kids out selling stuff in order to pay whatever. And they had to work those hours to get their money. And the money they earned was based on the hours they worked. And they got in trouble over that. In fact, not only did they have to pay, they had to deal with the withholding and the FICA.
Mm-hmm.
They had to deal with that, but they also had a gigantic fine.
Sure.
It was a huge fine. I can't remember the exact, but you could just about Google search booster organizations and tax problems. I think you could Google search that and find it. But it was some kind of a booster organization that actually did get in trouble. I have not heard of churches getting in trouble over this, but it could happen.
Sure.
And same thing as those booster organizations. All right. Employee. child labor law, things like that could come into play. The next issue is unrelated business income. So this coffee shop that I mentioned, that organization is paying unrelated business income tax because they're doing something other. Selling donuts is not our thing as a church. So that's unrelated business income. And so if we're doing that a lot, if we're selling a lot, then we could come under unrelated business income, which could be taxable. I know of churches that have a flea market kind of thing once a month, and they could get into unrelated business income. And that could be taxable.
So it feels like a business, it probably is.
Yeah. If you're conducting it like a business, then you may have to pay taxes on it. And let me mention an IRS publication. Well, in fact, you've got it in your packet. IRS publication 1828 talks about some of these issues, not in the way that I'm talking about it, but talks about some of these issues like unrelated business income, private benefit. Those are two of the topics in that, and you've got a copy of IRS publication 1828. Now, it doesn't say that at the top. It's down the bottom, and up at the top it says 501c3 something or other. But that's what that's talking about. All right. Next issue, number 7, is, gosh, I remember we'd send kids out in the neighborhood selling stuff. And I mean, they were by themselves, or maybe send them out as twos, two kids together. But you get into other issues about proper supervision. So suggestions, bottom of the page. And these are my easy button suggestions. If you want to do it the other way, you can. So you want to think easy. So number 1, don't ever create any kind of employee relationship with your youth or children who are out selling stuff. Just don't ever do that. And the best answer is divide the money equally among everybody, whether they sell or not. Number 2, have some policies about fundraisers. In order to have a fundraiser in the church, you go through this group of people. You could have some people from your children's ministry, and you put together a little, this is our approval mechanism. And maybe a few people from children's ministry, a few people from youth ministry, a few people from the finance committee, stuff like that, and they've got to go through that group of people in order to get their fundraiser approved. And that way you make sure you don't do too many fundraisers. You make sure they're aware of the issues like collecting sales tax. If they're gonna sell cookbooks, their senior adult group, they're out there selling cookbooks and they don't have any approval from the church, that's subject to sales tax, and they're not doing it right. And so you want some group of people who kind of look after this stuff to make sure we're doing it right as a church, and have some policies about it. You'll want to kind of keep tabs on what goes through the children's ministry, what goes through the youth ministry. Are we doing too many things because it's 2 different ministries doing it? And so you want to keep tabs on that. And then number 3, this is my suggestion. You don't have to, but it's my suggestion. To keep this easy, then you limit the number of fundraisers to about 2 to 3 a year for the entire church. So when you do that, now that just makes it easy. Then not subject to sales tax, you're not subject to some of these issues that you might otherwise be subject to. Okay, so, to limit it. And now, if you want to be like the coffee shop and be open, 6 days a week, and you want to pay the unrelated business income tax, and you want to pay sales tax, and you want to do those things, then that's fine. But just be aware of the things that you could be getting into. All right? And those are my suggestions. And then, of course, have adequate adult supervision for anything that you're doing with youth. Or you're subject to sales tax, possibly. You pay the payroll taxes, you pay the unrelated business income tax, and you deal with the private benefit issues. So that's your choices. And again, I wrote this page from the standpoint of trying to be the easy button, not all the possibilities. Okay, what questions do you have about fundraisers? Yes, ma'am.
What about like spaghetti suppers, meals? Like the parents get together, they cook the meal, and then after dinner, everybody says, we go back there and get a spaghetti plate and make a donation. It's not a certain price, but it's a donation.
Uh-huh.
Does that make any difference?
I asked that question about that and sales tax. Now, of course, a lot of times we do a spaghetti supper, it's really an internal thing. Mm-hmm. You don't need to worry about sales tax if it's within the church. But if you really want to make it open to the public, like I see this a lot with Boston butt sales. Mm-hmm. Hey, this Saturday. Well, in fact, there's a Greek Orthodox church here in Montgomery that they do a big sale every year. And of course, it's open to the public. They're advertising it on TV. They're all that stuff. That is subject to sales tax because it's open to the public, and I don't really think that would, even if they do that once a year, I don't think that would qualify because it's such a open to the public and event. I think the thing about it being exempt, because I consider it as casual sale, would be more about our yard sale type thing that we do once or twice a year. But anyway, this event that I was thinking about, they're subject to sales tax. They could be subject to unrelated business income tax. Possibly.
Maybe that's where I was going with that.
Yeah.
Anything.
But let's take the spaghetti supper. So who made a donation? Somebody might have donated the spaghetti. That would be a donation, but it would just be the spaghetti itself. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, let's say that we're going to sell a spaghetti dinner for $10, and I donated all the spaghetti. We can't take. Okay, we had 100 people, $10 a head. That's $1,000. I get credit for a $1,000 donation. No, because I donated the spaghetti. No, my donation would be the actual cost of the spaghetti, the sauce, the meat. It'd be actual cost of those things. Okay, let's take another one. Cake sale. And I donated a cake. This cake is worth $25. And I donated it. Do I get a $25 donation? No. If I want that to be a donation, it's the actual ingredients. The flour, the sugar, the eggs, the actual cost of what I donated.
And how do you?
And not my labor.
How do you do that accounting wise?
Well, they'd have to turn in a statement. Most of us wouldn't bother with that.
Yeah, okay.
They'd have to turn in a statement that they donated a cake and here's what it cost me to do
But you don't
the
really
cake.
have so you're gonna take $25 out of something to give them credit over here for their thing?
No, they do. It's like they donated merchandise.
Okay.
It's like somebody
And that's
that
what you're gonna put on their contribution statement?
Contribution
Like a
statement.
non-side, okay.
Yeah, contributions.
Okay.
That's what we're talking
That's a
about.
okay, I got you.
Yeah.
We have a monthly community dinner. We don't charge, but some people donate. Would
Mhm.
that get us into trouble?
No, not if you do it right. So we just ask for a donation. They pay for the cake, they pay for the dinner, they pay for whatever we're doing. They pay for the spaghetti supper. So did they make a donation? Now we call it donation, but did they actually make a donation? They donated $10 for the dinner, or they donated $25 for the cake, or they donated whatever. Is that a donation? No, because they got something in exchange for their donation. Now, if they want to give $100, then you could write them up a receipt saying, thank you for your donation of $100. In exchange for your donation, you received a cake worth $25. And you'd write it up that way. Yes, sir.
I'm not as concerned about whether they get a donation or not, more than are we supposed to be paying sales tax on those 100 plates that we sold?
Well, that would be number one. Is this event open to the public? Like,
You
know,
got
most.
grandma over here who's coming because her grandson goes to this church, but she doesn't. But she's gonna come and show up and buy a plate, so yes and
Yeah.
no.
Well, it depends on kind of what you do.
Advertising.
So, for most of our events, they're within the church. Even though we might have grandma that comes or some other people who come, they're within the church. You wouldn't have to worry about sales tax. But the event that this Greek Orthodox Church does, I mean, it's open to the public. It's advertised on the TV. It's all that. That is definitely open to public, and you would have to collect sales tax.
Ours would be open to the public, because we're not gonna turn away anybody that wants to come in and eat. But it's not advertised outside the churches, hey, come eat, come buy supper from.
Yeah, that'd be one factor. But just because anybody can come, that still could be basically a church event.
And it is, I mean, it's
Yeah.
certainly not meant to be. And we
Yeah.
hope people
People
come,
are
because we
telling.
might can bring them in,
But your people are doing the advertising, not the church itself.
Because you're wanting to bring people in, because,
Sure,
I mean,
that's
that's
what we
the
do.
whole purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not a fundraiser or anything like that, it's just an event, because we like to eat the best shit.
Yeah.
That's right. That's why we got that fried chicken.
All right, we're gonna take another 5-minute break. Any other questions on fundraiser issues? Okay, and please do understand the page that I wrote was from the standpoint of trying to make this easy. If you want to make it harder than that, you can. Yeah. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. All right, let's look at some designated funds policies. Go back to page 46. And I know we're going to be on page 50. But we want to review the 6 rules having to do with contributions. Number 1, it is a gift of cash or property. That's number 1. A donation is a gift of cash or property. And I'm talking about a tax deductible donation. Is a gift of cash or property. And you'll see down there that it's not merchandise. Merchandise is done that separately. That's property, but it is not a gift of time or labor. Time and labor don't count as a donation. And you think about it, all of us donate our time.
Yeah.
We all do. And that's not tax deductible. Number 2, it is deductible in the year given. And so somebody, let's see, what day was January 1st this year? Was it Monday? Was it Monday? So somebody says they bring something January 2nd and they say, well, hey, would you put that on my giving record for last year? No, you can't do it.
Oh, thank you, I get that all the time.
Yeah, yeah. And just say, I'm sorry, the IRS won't let us do that.
Okay.
Then you can blame it on the IRS.
But an example, like on, so tithes have been collected on Sunday, or could have come in over the weekend into the office,
Yeah, I get
with the
that.
intent of it being for that year. So you're gonna post it, but it's gonna be given credit for the 31st.
Yeah, as long as we received it by the
But
31st.
you're not you can't
By
post it,
31st.
but you, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I've had that scenario, like, they put it in the mail, but then we didn't get it. Oh, but
Yeah.
then they'll call and say, well, I wanted it for this year.
Yeah,
We
and,
didn't get it
It's
until
not in my
after.
office, so.
and mail, no, mail is the one exception.
Okay.
It's the date of the check.
If it was postmarked December of 23 and you didn't receive it until 24, that would count as a 23 donation.
Okay, but if they walk it in,
But
and we're
they-
in January.
If they walked it
we
in
cannot.
January saying, hey, I meant to mail this and I didn't, or I meant to bring it Sunday and I didn't, then you gotta say, I'm sorry, this is a 24 donation.
Even if they put their little December 31st.
Yeah.
Yeah, even if they wrote the check December 31st,
Okay, all right. I have had
it would
this
be a
scenario
24 donation.
Just tell them they're getting a head start on that.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so number one, it is a gift of cash or property. Number two, it is in the year given that it's notated as a donation. Number three, it's unconditional without personal benefit to the donor. Unconditional. It's unconditionally given. That's the thing. That's the reason that for your mission trip, you want to tell everybody your deposit or what you've paid on the mission trip is not refundable. See, that's why you want to say that. Because if it is refundable, then they didn't really make it unconditionally. You know, you put a condition on it, and your condition was if you end up not going, you want your money back. And that condition was applied to that quote donation. So it's really not a donation. A donation's got to be unconditionally. So you're saying, if I don't go, I want my money to go towards the mission trip to help somebody else to go. Okay? Number five, it is within the allowable legal limits. That's not a concern to us as a church. That's the donor's responsibility. And then number six is properly substantiated. And that one is our issue. So just want to review those. And so let's go on to page 50. And you should have some policies about designated funds. And you should have some policies. How many, let's see how many designated funds we have. Does anybody have more than 10 designated funds? Okay? Just one? Oh, you're the winner. You know, I usually start with 10 and usually the most I've ever heard of was 100.
Oh.
100 designated funds. And that's just an accounting nightmare.
I have more than 10.
So what we're going to talk about are things having to do with your designated funds. All right, control. And these policies are in your book, page 50. Remember that these are policy suggestions. Some of these things you don't have to do it that way. So all designated funds are under the control of the church. And that's really kind of a statement of IRS requirement, and it's just stated for the church consumption. All designated funds must be approved in advance of contribution. So I can't give the church, hey, here's $1,000 towards a new church van fund. And you're thinking, no, we don't have a church van fund. And so that needs to be approved in advance of their contribution. And some churches would say, we don't want a van. We've done that in the past. We don't really want a van, and so you'd have to say to that person, we don't have any intention of buying a van. Would you like to use this money towards the youth or towards the building fund or towards, you try to suggest something to them that would be okay with them. So all designated funds must be approved in advance before contribution. And the way you approve a fund, your finance committee could do it if that's the way you want to do it. It could be approved by the church. We have a list of our designated funds that are approved, and once a year the church votes to approve that list. So it can be approved by a finance committee or the whole church, whichever way you want to do it. But they need to be approved in advance. Number 3, and this one comes under suggestion. You don't have to do this, but it's a good idea. So have some kind of an exit strategy that all designated funds will be in effect for the current year and expire at the end of this year. They could be renewed, but they'll expire at the end of this year or end of whatever period of time you want to name. And you could say that in a blanket way, all designated funds, or you could say it in an individual way. So, like for example, my church, not in Huntsville, but my current, but the church previously, we had a building fund that was perpetual. While I was there, we built 3 buildings, and it was just going from one project to another to another. And a lot of churches, if they don't have a specific building project, they've got a remodeling project, or they've got, so you could have a building fund that might be perpetual. And if you want it to be that way, that's okay. Or you could say about the building fund, hey, our intent is to build this building beginning at the end of this year. And so this building fund is in effect for this year's. It will expire. We could renew it, but the building fund will expire. And you could do it either way. And so you could say that about a specific fund. You could say it about all funds and have them expire unless you renew them. And so I think it's a good idea to have an exit strategy. We want a limited number of designated funds. We don't want 100 funds. We don't want that. Yes, sir.
We got into that about 5 years ago. We had funds that had been on the books for maybe 20 years.
Yeah.
Probably before I was a member there. And we had no exit. And we ended up going to ask the lawyer, and I think we went through the probate to get those allowed to move over into other funds.
Yeah. That was one way that you might have had to do it.
Yeah.
There is a new way, and I'm going to talk about that at the end. But new to me. It's not really that new, but it's a new to me way.
And where I was trying to head with that was what we did was added into our bylaws. We can move a designated account if it hadn't been active for like a year through a vote of the church to the general fund.
Okay.
Does that sound reasonable?
As long as you put it in your bylaws, and now putting it in the bylaws will affect from when you change the bylaws forward.
Right.
It doesn't affect a designated fund that was already established before that bylaw change.
And we dealt with those through I really think it's through the probate office there.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so we dealt with that, and then everything forward, we restarted every designated fund
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. That you dealt with that in a legal way prior to your bylaw change. All right. So I think it's a good idea to have an exit strategy. Designated funds will expire. They have an expiration date. And then that way you don't end up with too many. And so what you do by the expiration date, we're going to spend the money for which it was given. And any leftover, your exit strategy will say, any leftover money from this project will go back to the general fund. Or here's where that money's gonna go. And you build that into your exit strategy. Okay? Acceptance. If a designated fund is not approved, we won't accept the money. Because if you do accept the money, you gotta use the money for the purpose it was given. You must use the money for the purpose it was given. And so you just say, hey, you want to give money to a van fund, we don't want a van, we've not approved that, we're going to give you your money, and you don't want to put this money in the building fund, then we're going to give you your money back. Churches are not in a habit of giving money back, but that's where you might have to.
What about if somebody gives, say here, I want to give this $10,000, you guys use it in whatever way, you need to this year for a special project or whatever.
That's
and we just
perfect.
put that in like a general designated fund, and it's like a holding, just like to hold that.
Yeah,
till
if
something
they don't
happens.
name anything specific and whatever the church needs, well, that's perfect. They've given that money unconditionally, which is perfect. All right, so we're not going to accept the money if it's not approved. We had to turn down some things. One that we should have turned down, we were given a timeshare. And we accepted it, but that wasn't a good idea. We didn't know any better. And it took about 7 years to sell it, and had to pay all those fees, those 7 years. It was bad. It was bad. We were offered a service station one time, and we did not accept that piece of property because you've got all the gasoline and oil and potential EPA cleanup that could cost millions of dollars, all that stuff. And we said, this is a very generous offer, we appreciate it, but we can't accept it because of the potential dangers, financially that could happen. And so sometimes a church wants to not accept something given. And in fact, this one is from Richard Hammer. No, from Frank Somerville. He said, be careful about receiving any property. Check that property out before you receive it, because it could be, it could have things tied to it, liens. It could have, it could have certain property restrictions tied to it. It could be in the middle of a swamp. Just be careful about property that you receive. Could have obligations tied to it, like the timeshare did. And so just be careful about property and acceptance. And yes, you can refuse a gift. You can do that. All right. Next. It is not for a specific person. I mentioned to you 6 IRS requirements about funds, about any kind of giving, and 6 IRS requirements. There's actually a 7th one, and that is that it cannot be for a specific individual or family. And that's really tied to, it's got to be unconditional. Is where that's tied.
I have a question. I have a congregant that they will send in, and they want to make a love offering to an individual that doesn't even go to our church or whatever, but they just want us to mail the check. And I do that, but I mark it as non-deductible.
It's non-deductible,
So,
exactly.
but that's okay, I can put it in
You
there
could
then.
receive the money Now, some churches would make a habit of saying, we don't accept that.
Yeah, they do it like once or twice a year.
But you can receive the money, you just mark it not deductible.
They just
If
want it
it's-
to be anonymous, is
Right.
what they,
And that's okay.
okay.
Yes, sir.
Our church secretary got cancer, and we've been routinely taking up extra love offerings and giving to her and her family. Should those be non-deductible?
Well,
It's not a
it,
designated fund, it's just a love offering.
it depends on how you do it. If 100% of that money is going to her, then it's not deductible. If you said, hey, this is for benevolence, and the benevolence team will decide where this money goes, and yes, you know, we are helping a person, we are helping the church secretary, but the benevolence team's gonna decide how we do that, or how much, then that is tax deductible. So, depends on how you do it.
We also, at one time, had a fund for a particular missionary couple that was from our area. And we had a designated fund for them, and we would give to that. But at some point, someone said that was probably not acceptable. It should have been just non-deductible. We could have still sent to them good.
A missionary couple you could do.
You could?
You could. And now I would term it a little differently than that. Let's say that it's, you know, such as the Smith couple, they're missionaries in Kenya, and we want to give them money. I would name it Africa missions or Kenya missions or something like that. I would not necessarily put their name on it, and that way, if they come home from the mission field and they're not going back, but we named it the Smith Fund, now we're kind of stuck with this money. What do we do? But if we've named it the Africa Fund or Kenya Fund or something, we can do something with that money. We're not going to send it to them anymore because they're not on the mission field. But we could do something with that money. But you're with a missionary couple that you want to give money to, you're really not giving that money to an individual. You're giving it to missions.
Right.
And so that one would be acceptable as not being to a specific individual.
And sometimes, like we have one that we will have things come in for, or the church makes it, but it's actually being sent to another church where they're doing like a church plant
Yeah.
type thing. So that's all.
Now, does that money go to the, okay,
It's
if
like in care of that church.
in care of that church?
Uh-huh.
So is your church noting all the donations?
No.
Or are you just a conduit that the money just
Uh-huh.
flows through?
Uh-huh.
So then it would be the other church that would notate any contributions.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question on the love offering. If you pass around the plate and take up a love offering, and most of the time there's cash in there, do you just take what is in that love offering and give it directly to that person, or does it have to go through your church?
Well, if you give it directly to that person, then nobody gets contribution credit for it. It didn't go through the church. Then you got to ask the question: is it taxable to that person? And it might be because they performed some kind of, they did a concert for our church, or they did something for our church. It's still taxable to that person. But we don't know how much it is, so we can't do a 1099 or a W-2.
Okay, so
Because
that
we just don't know.
give it to them, and then it's on them to.
Then it's on them,
Okay.
yeah, to report.
Would it be acceptable for the benevolence committee to alert the church that for the next 90 days, we're going to be giving any benevolence that comes in to this particular need? I
I don't think I'd say that. What if a real bad emergency happens in those 90 days? You know, I just don't think I would do that. But also, you're saying this money is going to go to a specific person, and you're promising that that money is going to go to a specific person, and I don't think that's a good thing to say.
I just know I'm gonna be asked at my church, I'm trying to get answers.
You could say, our intention is for the money in the next 90 days to go to that person. We've all talked about this need. It's a great need. We've all talked about it, and that is our intent. However, the benevolence, you need to know that the benevolence team will control it. And if another emergency crops up that really has a need, you just know that you might be helping somebody else. I think I'd say it that way. And that way we're not promising that 100% of all the money in the next 90 days is going to go to this one family. Yeah, I think I'd say it that way. All right, so it's not for a specific person to be tax deductible.
What about in honor or in memory of a specific person? Like it maybe go to the building fund, but it's in honor
Yeah,
of, that's okay, that just.
Perfectly fine.
That's paperwork.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, mission trips, and I've reiterated what we said earlier today. Mission trips are a tax deductible event. Different from camps and things, they are tax deductible. Parents giving towards that mission trip, that's tax deductible. Adult paying for their own mission trip, that's tax deductible. Or a person who is not going and they just give some money towards the mission trip, that's tax deductible. And so mission trips are different, and you'll want to explain that to people because a lot of people don't know that. So gifts given towards the mission trip will benefit others going or revert to the general fund if the recipient doesn't go. So you're just stating what I said earlier. You got to make this unconditional. So therefore, you're not going to get a refund of the mission trip money. You're not going to get your money back. You're not going to get your deposit back. You made it as a contribution. And so just leave it as that, and you won't get your money back. Yes,
Let me
ma'am.
ask you a question. So the ones that I did not give them credit for their deposits for the mission trip, should I go back for this year, the current year?
They
Should I
gave
go-
it in the current year?
Yeah,
Yeah, you could go back and add those deposits to their giving.
okay, good.
I would get the communication to everybody that, hey, your deposit, your money that you pay is non-refundable. But we are going to put that on your contribution statement.
We've got a team in Guatemala right now.
Yeah.
That's
was
how
okay.
I was told to do that. Deposits you don't give contribution credit for.
Well, you can.
Okay.
It depends. Do you have any intention? Okay, let's say it this way. Do you have any intention that if they decide not to go, they get their deposit back?
I haven't come up with that scenario. I can talk with the others to see what their policy is. I don't go to church there. I'm just
Yeah.
the financial.
Yeah.
So,
So if you had intention that you can make a deposit and you could get your money back, then that would be not a tax deductible contribution
gotcha. Okay.
if you want to do it that way.
Okay. All right.
Okay? All right. Mission trips. Gifts given toward the mission trip will benefit others going if the participant doesn't go. Now, this one is my opinion. This next one is my opinion. You can do what you want to with it. But I think that all of your designated funds should be very broad in the way that they're stated, the way that the focus is, and so forth. This is building fund. This is not our sanctuary fund. Because we might need that money for other purposes. We might need to remodel some space before we build the sanctuary. We might need some additional parking before we build that sanctuary. And so you want to be more broad than specific. You want to just say building fund. And tell your people, building fund means whatever we decide to build, to remodel, to repaint, to anything construction-wise that we do, that's building fund. It's not the sanctuary fund. Okay?
So I have a question. So, you said be broad and not narrow. So if we've got a children's ministry designated. So there's been a question, could we do another designated for like children's camp?
I wouldn't,
I didn't think so.
because, I mean, you could, but if you make it children's ministry, you can use that money for anything
Right.
children's ministry. Now, a lot of times we'll take up money while parents are paying for camp, a lot of times we'll get money.
Yes.
Hey, I want to help kids to go to camp, here's some money. But the actual title of your fund,
Right.
I would keep that children's ministry. That way we could use it for whatever.
That's what I thought. I didn't think there was a need, but I mean, I don't make those decisions.
Yeah.
I always try to label what it's for when they're taking up money for kids camp. I always children's camp, so they'll know, if they need to track those funds, what was brought
Yeah.
in.
Now, if they give money specifically for sending kid to camp, then we would want to honor that. We'd want to use it for that purpose. But I think the way that we title our fund would just be children's ministry.
Okay.
One of the weirdest ones that I
Thank
got
you.
one time was there was a church that had an ice maker fund. And I thought, that's not a good idea. What if we get, the ice maker costs $1,500 and we get in $2,000? What are we going to do? What are we going to do with the rest of that money? Or in fact, what if we're taking up money for the ice maker fund and somebody donates an ice maker? Well, now what do we do with that money? So the better title for that kind of fund would be a, church equipment fund. Something very, very broad that no matter what happens, or we change our mind or whatever, we can use that money for church equipment. So I like having a title that is very broad rather than narrow. Okay?
I have a question. Okay, you referred to the building fund. If we have a designated quote building fund, and I think of a building fund as we're gonna put a new building up somewhere.
Yeah.
We're gonna build something new. Okay, from what you just said, it sounds like that you think of a building fund as it could be a parking lot paving fund or
Yeah.
changing out the light switches to the motion detector kind of things or something like that. But am I right?
If you want to define it the way I defined it, then you need to say that.
Okay, well, it's not said anywhere.
If nothing was said, I'd think of building fund the way you think of building fund. It's new construction.
Okay, but if we decided that we needed to use it in a different manner, like for the building, for improvements, like new doors, new outside
Yeah.
doors or something like that, that's probably okay, but we should vote on it as a church, right?
Well, and you should communicate it.
Okay. What would, under those circumstances, if we if we took it to the church and said, okay, we need to have new outside doors with holes in them so you can see when you walk out if you're fixing to run over somebody or something like that. But anyway, we have a question with the same thing coming up, but they're trying to have different people in charge of handling this money instead of letting it go through the normal routes and applications of people who were needing that to use that fund. They're trying to maybe to change it to say somebody else is going to be in charge of that fund, or every fund in our church has a person who has to sign off on it. Every person is responsible for that account. And like if the building fund, then if it were you, then you'd have to make sure that the money being spent from the building fund has had your approval or whatever. But I guess what I'm trying to ask is, in that kind of situation, would the normal process of using that money have to apply? Or
You
could-
should. you should apply your normal processes of handling that money. Yeah,
And not letting her be in charge of it just because she's given a lot of it donated or
right,
or
right,
something.
right. You shouldn't have somebody else dealing with the responsibility for that money who's not the normal way to do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so, staff love offerings. Staff, and so a statement, staff love offerings are under the control of the church. And so, and this is another one that you get into, that giving to a specific individual. Somebody wants to say, hey, I want my love offering to go to the pastor. I don't want it to go to all these other people. I want it to go to the pastor. Well, you can't do that. And besides, it would not be tax deductible because you're specifying a particular individual. Okay? And so you have some procedures about staff love offerings. Staff love offering, we take up staff appreciation time. We take that up in, say, October or whenever you want to do it. And we divide it equally among all the staff. Everybody who gets a W-2 gets some of that offering, that we divide it among all of them. And you have some procedures about that. And somebody comes up and says, hey, I want all my money to go to the pastor. Well, okay, you could, but you might as well just give it to the pastor because this is not going to be tax deductible. And so have some procedures about your staff love offering. Now, by the way, your staff love offering, when it goes to that person, it is taxable money. It's added to the W-2. Okay? So staff love offerings are under church control. And that's how we do it. All right. Whoops. I didn't bring that one down. Benevolence policies that you need. And that's the bottom of this page 50. And you'll want to indicate not to a specific person. You'll want to indicate that the benevolence team will control it, and stuff like that. Okay. Suggestion: a donor may suggest a needy person, but cannot, control that. So, okay, I would like to see the Smith family's in need, and I'd like to see some benevolence money go towards them. I can suggest that, and then I give my money to the benevolence fund, and the church controls that, and that is a tax deductible event. If I said, hey, I want my money to go to the Smith family, and I'm insistent on that, and the church does use the money totally for the Smith family because of my insistence, then that's not tax deductible. So you'll want to have a statement that says, hey, you can suggest a need, but the benevolence team will control that. And that's what you want to do. All right, so we talked about policies. We've talked about a lot of different things today. And I'm going to wrap up, but wrap up our time now. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope it's been a good day. I hope you've learned a lot. Are there any questions about anything we talked about today, or really anything that we haven't talked about today? Any questions that you got about anything? Yes.
Going back to the new law, our executive pastor is wanting to use more of the job description to make some people ministers over areas.
Okay.
And you're saying be cautious with that, right?
Well, I'd be cautious. Depends on what you want to do. Like, for example, this children's director concept, and that person has not been a, quote, minister to you.
Right.
I think that's perfectly fine to say, hey, we're going to change your job description to make it more ministerial. That's easy to do.
What about, like, we started a food ministry, so could the person that's over that, she's the director, could she be directory of
minister of outreach or minister of,
Could be.
I mean, that's
Could be.
the
Now,
way
okay,
they're going to go.
food minister director, then you want to put into their work some ministerial duties.
Okay.
As you do the food ministry, we want you to share the gospel. We want you to teach a Bible study, or people come in and we want you to have prayer with them. Things of that nature that you build into a ministerial job description.
Okay, so if it's in the ministerial job description, it's built in,
Yeah,
then we can pay them the salary that they agree to, and it doesn't have to meet those new standards,
and,
correct?
right, they're
Okay.
not exempt.
Okay, right,
They are under the ministerial exception.
okay,
Now, you cannot make your church secretary a minister.
okay.
And I know we say ministry assistants, and we mean it, that they do ministry, but you cannot make them a minister.
So if they're working with the kids and they have a position with the kids, we can do it that way.
You can, they're gonna teach the Bible, they're gonna teach,
Yeah.
they're gonna teach the children the Bible, they're gonna teach them about Jesus, they're going to do those kinds of things. Yes, you could make them a minister. Now, where you get into, where I advise caution, is like we've got our daycare, the daycare teachers, they're gonna be teaching the Bible, teaching Bible stories, teaching Bible songs. They're gonna be having prayer with the children. We're gonna put those kind of things into their job description. I would have a little caution with that. I'd wanna talk to a CPA or an attorney, make sure that we're doing this correctly, and make sure that we're not, getting that too far out on a limb.
Right, but the director of the preschool would be okay.
Yeah.
Because she's doing the lesson plans and that kind
Right.
of thing. Okay. Okay, awesome.
Right.
I just want to stay in line.
Yeah, that's good. Very, very good question.
So I want to clarify something, so like on job titles, so just because minister is in the title doesn't mean they're like ordained or anything, they're not a true
Right.
Preaching minister.
Right.
But on the other hand, a director can have ministerial duties
Can have ministerial duties,
and
yeah.
that not be in their title.
Yeah,
Just because you have a ministry title doesn't mean you're ordained.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
You don't have to be ordained.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have prayer, and I'm gonna dismiss this. But if you have questions or something, then I'll be hanging around up here at the front, and I'll be glad to help with any kind of questions that you've got. Okay, let's have prayer together. Father, we thank you so much for today, and thank you for everybody who's come to participate with us. Thank you for those who participated online, and I pray that this has been a time that has been helpful and informative, and just bless us as we serve our churches, that we might be wise in everything that we do as we serve them. And Father, be with everybody as they go back home, keep them safe, and watch over us in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank y'all so much for coming.